Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I have some somber news to share. This past Sunday, America bid farewell to a remarkable patriot, Barbara from Harlem, who was a steadfast defender of the United States and its Constitution. Sadly, she has passed away, and to her family and friends, all I could say is just please accept my heartfelt condolences during this time. Barbara was more than just a familiar voice on this podcast. I mean, I still recall when I first met her, she had this magnetic presence that drew people in, and she had a larger-than-life personality. Her charisma, her vibrant spirit, and the undeniable pull that she had, she knew how to ignite people's passion. Anyone who has ever heard her speak knows exactly what I'm talking about. A few weeks back, during a conversation I had with Dr. Gadsad, we delved into the topic of the eighth deadly sin, cowardice, and Barbara stood in stark contrast to this trait. She had the courage of a lion and was unwavering and resolute. Backing down was not in her playbook, and she fearlessly championed her views, urging people to think for themselves, to come to their own conclusions, to open their eyes, to break free from an ideology that has kept people imprisoned. It didn't matter if she was on the streets or in the grocery store, at the church, or any other gathering. It didn't matter. She was going to say what she wanted to say, and no one was going to stop her. She had bigger cojones than most men I know, and I always had nothing but respect for her. She epitomized the greatness of America, and I admired her for standing up for her convictions. Not only her convictions, but the convictions of millions of Americans who believe in American exceptionalism. The millions of Americans who remain silent, which they shouldn't at this point. They need to learn from Barbara and speak out. Barbara was unafraid to stand up for her values of faith and family and freedom. And despite acknowledging America's imperfection, she recognized the nation's exceptional. She recognized the distinct character of America, and she challenged the notions within the black community, spotlighting the disintegration of the family, the street violence, and how the Democrats continue to perpetuate the racism of low expectations. That was the title of a book, The Racism of Low Expectations, where she chronicles her journey from a Democrat to a Republican. And it really provides a firsthand account of her experiences within the Democratic Party. The metamorphosis led her to embrace conservatism. She grounded herself in the principles of limited government. If Republicans had 1/10 of the courage and convictions that Barbara had, they would dominate politics. There is zero doubt about that. Barbara from Harlem's legacy is a testament to who she was. And everyone who knew her would say the exact same thing about her. Her unwavering dedication to her beliefs, her unapologetic voice, it's going to continue to resonate with all of us as a source of inspiration for those who value freedom and responsibility, the relentless pursuit of truth. And as we bid farewell to this patriot, while we may be mourning, we should be grateful. We should be grateful for the indelible mark she left on us. We should be grateful for the mark she left in our communities. Grateful that we got to know her. Her spirit will live on through her daughter, Bebe, and through the countless lives that she touched, reminding us all to stand strong in the face of adversity, to champion the ideals that make America the exceptional nation it is. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to pay tribute to Barbara by playing a few clips of her in her own words so you can get an understanding of what she was like. And she was no different in an interview or on the street or in one of the Republican club meetings. She never changed. She was someone that was real, never a phony. And that you always have to appreciate, especially in this day and age. For this episode, I'm going to talk about something that should concern every single American. And I knew that it concerned Barbara. Our officials are taking us down a dangerous path, a path where there are no good outcomes. And they are creating the very thing that they say they want to prevent. Now, before I jump into the episode, make sure to follow this podcast so that you never miss an episode. And visit the PAS Report website, PASreport.com. Share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to jump right into the main topic. So hang tight. We'll be right back. P.A.S. report listeners, our government is out of control. Criminal tax hikes, hyperinflation, a full-blown recession. It's part of a grand plan. The billions of dollars Biden keeps sending to the corrupt government in Ukraine, the trillions in new taxes he wants to shove down your throat, the electronic banking system crash that resets everyone to zero, checking accounts, saving accounts, 401ks, IRAs, all of it, zero. But you don't have to be a victim. Protect your money and get up to $10,000 in free silver to do it when you call Goldco. Goldco's helped protect over $2 billion in gold and silver for people like you and me. They're offering you up to $10,000 in bonus silver when opening a qualified IRA account just for being a supporter of the P.A.S. report. So whether you want to protect 50 grand or $500,000 or more, this is your opportunity to protect yourself from our out-of-control government. Don't be a victim and call Goldco today. 855-656-0196, 855-656-0196, or go to goldco.com/PAS report. Welcome back, everyone, and get into this week's episode. I'm going to put on my emergency management hat because as a former emergency management professional that has done numerous threat assessments and understands terrorism, whether it's domestic or international, I know the factors that contribute to radicalization and extremism. The echelons of power within the United States, I'm talking about the government, I'm talking about the media, I'm talking about big tech, I'm talking about the corporate entities throughout society. They are wittingly or unwittingly nurturing the seeds of another Timothy McVeigh as they continue to target their political opposition. Now, I don't say that lightly. And I think that there's a lot of people that think the same way that I do. They're just afraid to actually say that. But the very officials that claim that they want to prevent domestic terrorism, they are crafting the playbook for the very forces that they want to counter. They are the ones that are creating the path towards radicalization. They are the ones that are creating the path towards extremism. As of this recording, we stand on the eve of a potential fourth indictment of former President Trump. And I can't help but observe how certain actions and policies, all under the illusion of safeguarding our democracy, right? They want to preserve our democracy. We have all these biggest threats to democracy. Well, they're the ones sowing the seeds of division and disillusionment. They're the ones that are willing to violate every single constitutional norm in this theater of political maneuvering. These self-anointed guardians of democracy have brazenly cast aside time-honored traditions. And they're the ones that are destroying democracy as they callously disregard the legitimate grievances voiced by millions upon millions of the American people. This phenomenon, it's not new, and it actually started prior to President Trump. It's partly what led to President Trump. I'll get into that in a few minutes. But we have to look at how out of touch the officials are, and a lot of the American people are as well. You have a number of people who in the 1990s, early 2000s, they lost their careers, they lost their livelihoods as manufacturing in the United States was dismantled, as jobs were moving overseas. They were told to get over it, to get over losing their livelihoods, that their jobs aren't coming back. They were told that times are changing and that they should learn a new skill, learn to code or something. Now, that's insulting. Imagine you work your entire life, put in 20, 25 years, and you lose your job because it was moved overseas. And then the political officials that are supposed to represent you, not only do they not show an ounce of empathy, they actually rub salt in the wound, telling you that you should just learn a new skill as if it's that easy. I mean, there's a reason we have the expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If you've been doing the same thing your entire life, and then one day that ends, it's not that easy to pick up a new skill. And so these people were relatively ignored. And they were met with these dismissive attitudes by the political elite and the educated circles. And it's going to be ironic, right? Because all those, the ones with the college degrees, with the bachelors and the masters and the PhDs, all those white-collar positions, it's going to be interesting that how they feel when their jobs become obsolete because of the AI revolution. That's going to be the interesting mark, because I could guarantee you that they're going to be very bitter and resentful. They're going to complain that they have this degree, this piece of paper, and that they should have the right to a job. So you have all these elites that look down on the working class people that reject their grievances, and the message was clear. It's you don't matter, that your hardships are inconsequential and you need to get over it. That was the message. And the elitist attitude would only get worse, particularly following the election of former President Trump in 2016. That marked the moment, the exact moment, when the establishment lost their minds, when the establishment lost all faith in the American people. And soon after the election, the campaign to undo what they deemed as the American people's mistake began. And they would violate every single norm. They would abuse their power to such an extent that they make J. Edgar Hoover look like a choir boy. The most powerful law enforcement agency in the world would embark on a mission to wreak havoc, orchestrating a deceitful investigation into alleged Russian collusion, all based on information from the Hillary Clinton campaign that was paid to get the Steele dossier, which all turned out to be BS. The FBI actually knew it was BS at the time. They couldn't verify any of it, and they inflicted an enormous amount of harm on this nation, dividing our nation on baseless allegations, all because they didn't like the results of the 2016 election that they themselves interfered in. Now, you would think that given the egregious abuse of power, you would think that people would be held accountable. Instead, what happened? Well, James Comey got a $2 million book deal. Others got high-paid punditry jobs on MSNBC and CNN. Not a single person really faced any accountability. In fact, you had Kevin Kleinsmith, who doctored evidence, who changed an email from the CIA stating that Carter Page was an asset to them, that Carter Page helped them. He literally doctored an email and submitted it to the FISA court, and what happened to him? He got probation. That's it. And this week, nobody knows about it because, God forbid, the press really reports on it. You have Charles McGonigal, one of the top officials over at the FBI, one of the people that actually spearheaded the Trump-Russia collusion BS. He's going to be pleading guilty in a federal court. What is he pleading guilty of, you ask? What is he pleading guilty of? Well, he's pleading guilty because he was colluding with the Russians, because he was working with the Russians. Amazing, isn't it? It's almost like Devon Archer going to jail for tax evasion. I'll remind you, Devon Archer is Hunter Biden's business partner. He went to the White House over 30 plus times. He's going to be going to jail for tax evasion as Hunter Biden gets a sweetheart plea deal. Amazing, isn't it? Then you look at throughout the pandemic, right? You have officials that issue draconian mandates, forcing lockdowns, school closures, mask mandates. And when ordinary people stood up and questioned these measures, they were attacked, they were mocked, they were ridiculed. They were called science deniers. When they protested these unconstitutional decrees, you had over 1,000 public health officials signing a letter equating the protests of authoritarian decrees from little Mussolini wannabes as a form of white supremacy. And then as the George Floyd protests, as cities were engulfed in crime and looting and arson and death, the medical establishment supported these protests. They supported the riots, the death, the destruction. And it tells you a lot, right? It tells you what you need to know. So if we're looking at what creates extremism, well, look at what our government has been doing. I mean, the Twitter files provide ample evidence of the government colluding with social media companies to silence and censor anyone who criticized the government's preferred narrative. You have the CDC's Carol Crawford, and I will always keep harping on that, who pushed Twitter to censor tweets that contain what she deemed as unapproved opinions, as if the government gets to determine which opinions people can express and which ones we can't. If that is the case, we are not in a free society. That is an authoritarian society. That is the tyranny of government. Then you had the vaccine mandates. Millions of people being held hostage. You either get the vaccine or have your livelihood destroyed. President Biden even threatened the unvaccinated.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us.
And the smug attitude of these officials and even ordinary people, where they said, good, they should be fired. That smug attitude, then you wonder why people are bitter and resentful, forcing people to try and do something that they didn't want to do, that wasn't going to be in their best interest, and you destroy their livelihood. Even worse, again, you put salt in the wound. You wouldn't even let them claim unemployment. As illegal immigrants, we're able to tap unemployment in several states. If you lost your job because of the coronavirus vaccine mandate and you didn't get the vaccine, you were not going to get unemployment. And it all turned out to be lies, right? Everything the government narrative was pushing were lies. From the origins of COVID to declaring that the vaccine stops the spread and transmission of the virus, to cloth masks and surgical masks actually work, to social distancing. It was all lies. And they sit there. They feed us this misinformation. At the same time, scientists that were telling the truth, scientists that actually had a brain and actually used it and didn't conform to the groupthink mentality, scientists like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, they were the ones that were censored. Now, rather than apologize, rather than ensure that this never happens again, the officials, they ignore all the abuses of power. Not only did they ignore the abuses of power, they're actually seeking to rewrite history. It's truly mind-boggling. Then you look at the 2020 elections. You're not allowed to question it. The very act of questioning the integrity of the 2020 elections remains a taboo topic, one that dares not be broached. We're not allowed to question the 51 intelligence officials who interfered in the election by declaring the Biden laptop expose by Miranda Devine in the New York Post as Russian disinformation. Not allowed to question that. We can't ask how the over $400 million of Zuckerbucks influenced our elections. $400 million, almost $500 million to take over local election operations. But we're not allowed to talk about that. We're not allowed to ask about that. We're forbidden to question how state governments flawlessly implemented an entirely new system of voting when they can't even fix potholes correctly. Not allowed to ask those questions, and that's the amazing part. But it doesn't end there, because in the same fashion, parents throughout the country, they're not allowed to raise concerns regarding what their children are being exposed to in school. If they raise any concerns, well, then that's taken as a threat. You're threatening school boards. You're intolerant. You're a bigot. You're transphobic because you don't want your children being exposed to gender ideology. And in spite of the failures to educate our children, understand that the proficiency levels, basic proficiency levels, are at all-time historic lows. They shut schools down in certain areas for nearly 2 years. Children are far behind where they're supposed to be. Instead of correcting that, you have schools pushing this divisive diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice curriculum, introducing children as young as kindergarten to radical gender ideology, pushing this anti-Americanism in our schools, making children believe that America is an evil and sinful place, that it's based solely on the idea of slavery and racism, that our institutions are inherently racist, that you're either born an oppressor or an oppressed. You're born a victimizer or a victim, dividing us. And when parents began expressing their outrage when they figured out what their children were learning about, what happened? What happened? Well, you had the Attorney General of the United States quickly mobilize the FBI to investigate. You have parents' rights groups, including Moms for Liberty, being declared extremist organizations by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I warned you all about that. I warned you about the Southern Poverty Law Center, particularly when it came to the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. After the Biden administration released this strategy in June of 2021, I went on Tucker Carlson and I warned how regular individuals are going to be labeled as extremists.
In the meantime, though, the Biden administration is not waiting. It has declared war on domestic terror. You may be in that category. We know because the administration has released a document called the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. It reads like a manual for targeting the administration's political opponents, because that's exactly what it is. And if there's one story you should pay attention to this year, it's this one. It could affect you. Nick Giordano has studied the document. He studied a lot of American government documents. He's an associate professor of political science at Suffolk Community College and the host of the P.A.S. report. He joins us now. Professor, thanks so much for coming on. We want to talk to you because you, unlike most people in the media, have actually read this document. This document comes from the White House. The first page has Joe Biden's signature on it. Tell us what it says and what it means.
Well, this is actually one of the most concerning documents I've ever read that was authored by government officials. And when you look at it, it's clear that the analysts in the field, they didn't write this document. It was the political appointees trying to push an agenda. They list 3 factors that drive domestic terrorism. The first factor is racism. And when you look at it, they never really define racism except for white supremacy, of course, and the superiority of white race. And these are the same people that believe that racism is inherent. You're born with it. So if racism is inherent, the question is, are we born domestic terrorists? But it goes deeper than that. Then it talks about anti-government sentiment and anti-authority sentiment. And this is where it gets dangerous. The anti-government sentiment, if you call for small, limited government, if you criticize the government in any way, are you going to be deemed as someone that has anti-government sentiment, anti-authority? If you question government powers, if you push back against the government, if you look at the coronavirus and you question the mandates that came out as unconstitutional, well, now you're classified as anti-authority. And just think back, over 1,200 public health officials a year ago signed a letter stating that if you protest lockdowns, that's white nationalism. So we have these vague terms that are being used that really could encompass anything. In the document, it talks about violence. Now, we all abhor violence. Violence should not be tolerated in any way. But this document goes much further than that. It talks about incitement and what can incite domestic terrorism. And it doesn't give any explanation except for the fact that the government, the powers that be, will determine what incitement is. But on page 10, it talks about a few examples. If you question the 2020 election and bring up the idea of election fraud, if you talk about COVID and question the mandates that came out, or conspiracies, engage in what the government deems conspiracies, that could incite domestic terrorism, and therefore you can get punished for it. So if you put out a tweet talking about election fraud, are you now going to be targeted and labeled a domestic terrorist?
As I said then, this is one of the most dangerous government documents that we have ever seen. And unfortunately, it's all designed to create a chilling effect, attempt to eradicate any form of government criticism. The act of raising concerns and objectives to governmental policies is recasted as the propagation of anti-government and anti-authority sentiment. So that's where we stand. This is what they have done. Not you. They have done this. Now, when we get back, I'm going to talk about what they're doing. Rather than address the grievances, rather than understanding and showing any semblance of empathy, instead, they're doing the exact opposite. And I'll get to that when we get back from this quick break. P.A.S. report listeners, hurricane season is almost here, and the time to prepare is right now, not when the hurricane hits. When Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast, it destroyed countless homes and left many without access to food and clean water. Millions lost power, some for weeks. The floods that followed the hurricane washed out roads, made it impossible for grocery stores to restock their shelves. Families were desperate. They were waiting for help that was slow to arrive. But what if you didn't have to rely on FEMA to provide for your family during a crisis? The answer is simple. Be prepared with emergency food kits from 4 Patriots. Their long-lasting and delicious food options are specifically designed to provide you and your loved ones with the sustenance you need when you need it most. And these food kits are hand-packed in the USA, last up to 25 years, compact inside covert storage totes, include a wide variety of delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and they're backed by thousands of 5-star customer reviews. 4 Patriot survival food is not just for natural disasters. In today's world of uncertain supply chains and unpredictable emergencies, it's more important than ever to have a backup plan. Whether it's temporary power outage, a winter blizzard, rising food costs, you can rest easy knowing that you have a reliable source of food to see you through. And right now, you go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the emergency food supply kits that are designed to last up to 25 years. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. Welcome back, everyone. So rather than address the grievances of ordinary Americans, unfortunately, we find ourselves subjected to attacks. We find ourselves being marginalized, and we carry the risk of being labeled domestic terrorists. President Biden's declaration solidified this when he branded nearly half the country as people that are determined to destroy democracy, and that they represent, quote, an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic and are the biggest threat since America's founding. When he was giving that raving lunatic speech with the blood-red background and with the 2 Marines at his side, it really was disturbing. It was the image of every single third world dictator that you could possibly imagine. That's what that was. And it wasn't, let's be honest here, it wasn't President Biden that wrote that speech. It was his people that wrote that speech. He only just reads what's on the teleprompter. He doesn't come up with his own speeches. So that's how these people feel. They have no regard for you. They don't have a regard for our system or processes. They don't understand the elements of democracy. That's clear. They're willing to destroy democracy in order to preserve whatever demented vision of democracy that they have. And Now they're on this shock and awe campaign of indictments against a former president. Now, most of the cases, and here's the thing, here's why it's all political. These are political indictments. I don't look at them as criminal indictments. They are employing untested legal theories in all the cases that we've seen. And we stand on the eve of the fourth indictment over in Georgia. These are all untested legal theories that they're doing. Now, if they wouldn't need to do legal jujitsu if there was actual crimes. I mean, if President Trump committed crimes, I prosecute him. But you don't introduce these new legal theories breaking every single norm that we've had in this country in order to take down a sitting president, or former president, not a sitting president. They're not going to take down a sitting president. It's a former president. But he's not the real target. Okay, the real target is to make sure that Trump and people like Trump never get into power again, never challenge the establishment again, never challenge the bureaucrats again. Now, I want you to understand, think about the amount of resources that have been utilized in these prosecutions. Think about how much money, taxpayer dollars, have been spent. Think about how much time has been spent investigating the former president. And it's not just these 3 or 4 indictments. How many investigations have there been since 2016? They expend every ounce of energy to take down Trump. Yet their commitment to shielding President Biden, it's obvious. We all see it. It's unparalleled. You have this dualistic treatment, and it's only going to deepen the chasm of disillusionment, reinforcing the narrative that the system is rigged against nearly half the country. When you have all this evidence of Biden corruption out there, all this evidence that exists, like it, and I said it last week, it's a 5-alarm fire. It's not like innuendo. It's not speculation. It's their own documents, the Biden's own emails, their own text messages, their own voicemail messages, their own business partners. It amazes me how they are protecting the sitting president and how obvious and blatant, where they have no regard. What really is astounding, though, is how these forces, the deep state, how they exhibit an absence of self-awareness. They're oblivious to the fact that their own detachment from the people was what paved the way for the emergence of the former president in the first place. Had they paid attention to the people, had they paid attention to their grievances, had they listened to the people, had they shown 1 ounce of empathy, President Trump would never have won in 2016. But instead, and you see how little regard they have for people. When they talk about Trump's supporters, they use words and terms like purge and deprogram and re-educate. Those are the words they use when talking about their political opposition. And I continue to grow extremely concerned about this because I know the path towards radicalization. And I know it's forged by unaddressed grievances, by suppressed dissent, by the unchecked abuse of power and the attacks on political opposition. It's very evident to see. And the irony of all this is that the harder they go after the former president, the more his supporters are going to stand their ground, the more that they're going to dig in. And the reason that they're going to dig in is because they believe that he's being unfairly targeted. They believe that there's this 2-tier system, the double standards that exist that are clear for everyone to see. Now, listen, I understand why so many people love the former president. I also understand why so many people dislike the former president. But what I can understand is this irrational and unhinged attitude that we must destroy everything in order to take him down and make sure that someone like him never enters the White House again. I can't understand that. And I am not someone that believes in idolatry, okay? To me, it's about America. It's not about one person. It's not about one man. I think there are some that actually do engage in idolatry when it comes to the former president. But if you want to talk about a real cult, the cult is the ones that have lost their collective minds, that are willing to destroy everything because they hate the former president and they hate the people that support him. And we find ourselves in an era of profound instability, confronted by the possibility of a new Timothy McVeigh emerging. And this new Timothy McVeigh is being cultivated by the very officials who are professing that they're working hard to avert such an outcome. Now, I tend to believe, and I don't have evidence to support this, I will admit that, this is speculation on my part, but I know how people think, and that's the frightening aspect. Sometimes when you get into the mind of people, you're very afraid of what you see. But there are those who are banking on such an occurrence. And the reason that they're banking on such an occurrence is because they want to be like, I told you so. I told you that these people were a threat. I told you that they were domestic terrorism. And so now we need more powers. We need more laws passed giving us, the bureaucracy who has routinely abused their power time and time again. You have to give us more power in order to target this new emerging threat that exists. That's my fear, that you have people that want something to occur because they want to exploit any incident as a pretext to introduce a more authoritarian government, more authoritarian measures under the guise of preserving democracy. And you have so many dumb people in America that that's exactly what they'll do. They'll be willing to give up that power. And if you don't believe me, it would be nice if the press just asked a simple question, like, how do they think that this really ends? How do they think it ends? There are no good possible outcomes. None anymore. And that's the frightening aspect, because I do believe that Trump's going to be found not guilty in New York. I do believe that he's going to be found not guilty in Florida, in the documents case. D.C., while I think the case is actually very, very weak, I don't see the legal basis for the case. Again, it's one of those untested legal theories that they're coming up with. Let's just throw a bunch of things at the wall and see if anything sticks. I do think that there is a danger for the president there simply because it's Washington, D.C. You have a D.C. jury pool where 90% of the people supported the Democrat Joe Biden. Over 90% of people supported Hillary Clinton. If you took a poll of all the D.C. residents, I could guarantee you that President Trump may have 5% of support. I mean, the idea that we're going to get a fair jury is just illogical. And you can't even do a bench appearance in front of this judge because the judge that's been appointed to this case is totally biased. We see it every single day. And so, again, how do they think this all ends? That's my biggest fear. Because, unfortunately, only those in power can pull us back from the brink. And a good start would be by acknowledging the legitimate grievances of the people. Start rebuilding the trust in the system, admitting that you abused powers, having Congress pass laws which restrict the regulations on the bureaucracy, utilizing their power of oversight over the bureaucracy. Our system has been marred by ideological corruption and the abuses of power. The only way out of this mess is if we begin implementing reforms, if we prioritize transparency, but most importantly, we have to enforce accountability. Accountability for anyone that's abused their power. They need to get out of the government, and they need to get out of the government now. These stand as three pivotal instruments that may guide us back from the brink. If they continue to push and push and push, sooner or later the rubber band's going to snap. And I hate to break it to everyone out there, but once that happens, we live in a completely different America. We live in an America that we don't recognize. In America, the old America that we know and love, the America that we've grown up in, that America will be gone. And so we need to hope that there's some really smart people behind the scenes that actually see this and are going to figure out a way to pull us back from the brink. Now, I said at the beginning of the episode, I want to pay a little tribute to Barbara from Harlem in her own words, and I think that Barbara would agree with me with everything going on. So I'm going to leave off with her. I'll be back next week with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Well, my book, the title of it is Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations. I go through where when I became a registered voter at the age of 21, but that was before it was changed to 8, I was a Democrat. I'm a Harlemite, raised there, went to school there, and lived there all of my life. So it was expected of Black people to register as a Democrat, which I did. In my book, I go through many of the things that I observed firsthand as a Democrat, being a member of many of the Democratic clubs, listening to what was said, and I had an epiphany. My epiphany was something wasn't right. This was the party that always wanted me to reflect upon slavery and to not like white people because of slavery. My book highlights, I have a chapter in there called Thank God for Slavery, and I think people will find that very fascinating, the way I look at it. Being raised by my mother and my grandmother primarily in a church, I was always taught to love thy neighbor. So the message I was getting at the Democratic Club didn't, fit in with what I was being taught in the church. And I rebelled against it. I rejected it. And I even secretly, as a Democrat, worked on the Giuliani campaign when he ran for mayor of New York City. And I'm very proud of the things that I've done because one thing about it, my conscience is clear. My book is written with guides as my God, my country, and my conscience. And I hope people will find it interesting because everything in that book is true. Well, one thing about the younger generations, which is very unfortunate, particularly in the black country and nationwide, we have too many of our young people in the black community, 73% at least, born without a father, born outside of having a structured family. So they don't have those family supports in place. Nationwide, that number is approximately 40%. Last time I looked at the statistics, that nationwide we have generations of children being born without a stable family. The Democrats have sent a message out that, you don't need a man, and that's so untrue. All a person has to do is go look at look on the internet in a place called the fatherless generation and see how devastating that is to society. So that's one of our major problems within the black community in particular. We have too many of our children who don't have any structure. They're not taught to be respectful. They're not taught the history of America. They're not taught how to be proud. Some of them don't even have the father's name on their birth certificate, and I know that because I ran a family daycare center for many years. And when I looked at birth certificates and where the father's name should be, it was blank. To be honest with you, I had to close my office door and cry. Listen, I go around in my areas, in the black communities in particular, with my hat on with Donald Trump on it. Now, until recently, I've had no problems, but, recently I did have a slight little problem. But to tell you the truth, I get people waving at me, smiling at me. I even had one woman buy a pizza for me, a black woman. This is all in the black community. I had another one when I was standing in line to buy some groceries. She told me to come on up here. She paid for my food. And these people, and I had on a Trump pin, and a young man said, "Oh, I like your pin." But he said it very softly. So a lot of them are absolutely afraid to speak out. And like I said, I've had wonderful reception with my hat and Trump on my hat. Just recently, I had 3 people to confront me. One was a nice young man, and then this guy who said he was his father, and then another woman approached me. But I quickly, just wiped the mat with them real quick. When she was talking about Trump and his children by different women, I said, but at least he's married to all of them. I said, we have 73% of black children born to single mothers. So that kind of shut her down. And the gentleman, the nasty little whatever he was, he got so angry. He told me, "You can take that pen and shove it. You know what he said." And I told him, I said, "I'll do what I want when I want to." You're going to release criminals who have committed crimes who go out there and do the same thing, and then no bail, just let them out again? That shows how little they care about human life.
And
so
no
don't tell me that you
feel like a prisoner in their home.
And and that's how they want us to feel, like prisoners.
It's insane.
This is insane. This is really insane. And, every time I go out, I have to try to hold myself, contain myself, because I start saying, obscene.
No, but I understand it.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter @PAS Report.